Think you know everything about country music's golden age? Behind the rhinestones and cowboy hats lurks some of music's darkest secrets. One beloved star turned out to be a cold-blooded killer. Another mysteriously vanished after a suspicious plane crash. From hidden crimes to chilling conspiracies, these are the shocking scandals that Nashville tried to bury. And some of them are even darker than you can imagine. The 1960s were supposed to be a time of peace and love, but for one of country music's biggest stars, they marked a descent into unimaginable darkness. Spade Cooley wasn't just any country musician. He was literally crowned the king of Western swing, with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and his own television show. His weekly program drew over 75 million viewers, making him one of the most recognizable faces in entertainment. But behind that perfect smile lurked a monster that even his closest friends couldn't imagine. Cooley had already shown signs of trouble. Known for his explosive temper backstage, he'd attack band members over minor mistakes and fire musicians on the spot for looking at him the wrong way. His wife, Ella May, had previously filed for divorce, citing cruel and inhuman treatment, but was convinced to return home for the sake of their children. Those who knew them say Cooley's paranoia and violent outbursts only got worse after their reconciliation. On April 3, 1961, Cooley committed an act so brutal that Nashville spent decades trying to erase him from country music history. In front of his 14-year-old daughter Melody, Cooley beat his wife Ella May to death, forcing the teenager to watch the entire horrific incident. According to court testimony, he had accused Ella May of infidelity and being part of a sex cult, claims that were never substantiated. He told Melody, "You're going to watch me kill your mother. If you move, I'll kill you too." The details that emerged during the trial shocked the nation. Cooley had tortured his wife for hours, stomping on her head with his cowboy boots and burning her with cigarettes. When police arrived, he calmly told them, "You guys are too late. She's dead." The Western Swing King was sentenced to life in prison, but the story doesn't end there. In a twist that seems almost too dark to be true, Cooley was granted a 72-hour furlough in 1969 to perform at a police benefit concert. Friends said he seemed eerily upbeat, telling everyone he'd be back in the spotlight soon. After receiving a standing ovation for his performance, he walked off stage, suffered a massive heart attack, and died. Some called it divine justice. Others called it too easy an ending for a brutal killer. Either way, the king of Western swing's reign ended exactly where it had begun, on stage. His daughter Melody never performed music again and spent decades in therapy dealing with the trauma of that horrific night. Nashville quickly scrubbed Cooley from its history books, but the dark legacy of country music's killer king lives on. On July 31, 1964, country music superstar Jim Reeves took off in his single-engine Beechcraft aircraft into darkening skies over Tennessee. What happened next would spawn decades of conspiracy theories and unanswered questions that haunt Nashville to this day. Reeves, known as Gentleman Jim for his smooth baritone and impeccable manners, had survived a near crash just months earlier. Friends say he'd been acting strangely ever since, even telling some people he didn't expect to live much longer. The official story seems simple enough. Reeves and his manager Dean Manuel hit bad weather and crashed. But when investigators finally found the wreckage after a 42-hour search, things just didn't add up. The plane had nosedived at a steep angle, unusual for an experienced pilot like Reeves, who'd logged hundreds of hours in the air. Even stranger, some witnesses reported hearing the plane's engine cut out completely before the crash, while others swore they heard it running perfectly until impact. But it was what emerged after the crash that really raised eyebrows. Just weeks before, Reeves had taken out a massive insurance policy worth over $3 million in today's money. His manager had been acting strangely in the days leading up to the flight, making cryptic phone calls and seemingly avoiding certain questions about their travel plans. Then there were the missing flight records. Paperwork that should have been routine somehow disappeared from the airport's files. Perhaps most chilling were the last words anyone heard from the plane. In his final radio transmission, Reeves sounded unusually distressed, saying something about visibility zero. But weather reports from that day showed conditions that, while poor, shouldn't have been catastrophic for an experienced pilot. Some claim the recording of this transmission mysteriously vanished from official records, with only second-hand accounts remaining of what Reeves actually said. The crash site itself yielded more questions than answers. The plane's fuel gauges were found to be working perfectly, contradicting initial theories about fuel problems. And while both men's bodies were badly damaged in the crash, some investigators noted unusual aspects about their injuries that didn't quite match typical crash victims. Most puzzling of all, Reeves's beloved guitar, which witnesses saw him carry onto the plane, was never found in the wreckage. To this day, some believe Reeves's death wasn't an accident at all, but rather the result of sabotage or even a carefully planned insurance scam gone wrong. His widow never remarried and spent years fighting to access the complete investigation files, which some say remain partially classified. Whatever really happened that dark day over Tennessee, the mysterious death of gentleman Jim Reeves remains one of country music's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. In 1975, the Country Music Association Awards were supposed to be a night of celebration. Charlie Rich, the silver fox of country music, was at the height of his fame and had been chosen to present the Entertainer of the Year award. But what happened next would go down as one of the most shocking moments in country music history and effectively end Rich's mainstream career overnight. Witnesses say Rich had been drinking heavily backstage, mixing pills with alcohol, a common but dangerous habit among stars of the era. When he stumbled onto stage clutching the envelope containing the winner's name, many in the audience nervous laughed, thinking it was just Charlie being Charlie. After all, his bad boy image had helped make him famous, but the behind-closed-doors singer had something far more dramatic in mind. As he opened the envelope and read that John Denver had won the award, something dark flashed across Rich's face. Without saying a word, he pulled out a silver cigarette lighter. The audience watched in stunned silence as he held the envelope up and set it on fire, the flames reflecting in his glassy eyes. As the paper burned, he sneered, "My friend, John Denver," with such contempt that even hardened industry veterans felt a chill. The fallout was immediate and severe. The CMA banned Rich from future ceremonies. Radio stations pulled his music from their playlists. His record label, embarrassed by the incident, began promoting other artists instead. But why would Rich commit career suicide over an award presentation? The answer lies in the deeper divide that was splitting country music at the time. Many traditional country stars viewed Denver as a pop music interloper who didn't deserve to be considered country at all. Rich, who'd spent years playing smoky bars and honky-tonks before making it big, saw Denver's clean-cut image and crossover success as an insult to real country music. Some say Rich had been planning the protest for weeks, while others believe it was a drug-fueled impulse that spun tragically out of control. In the years that followed, Rich's career spiraled downward. He never had another major hit, and the industry that had once embraced him now treated him like a pariah. Interviews from his later years suggest he regretted the incident, but felt he'd been standing up for authentic country music. "Maybe I did it wrong," he said in his final interview, "but somebody had to do something." The burning envelope became a symbol of the old guard's resistance to change, and how a single act of defiance could end a superstar's career in less than 5 minutes. The night of November 4th, 1960, started like any other for country star Johnny Horton. He was scheduled to perform at the Skyline Club in Austin, Texas, the same venue where his friend Hank Williams had given his final performance. But something felt different this time. Horton, known for hits like Battle of New Orleans and North to Alaska, had been telling friends for weeks that he was going to die. Not someday, but soon. What makes this story truly chilling is how specific Horton's premonitions were. He'd been having vivid dreams about dying in a car crash with a drunk driver. The dreams were so detailed that he'd started taking different routes to shows and insisting on driving during daylight hours whenever possible. That night in Austin, the fear became overwhelming. Horton stunned everyone by refusing to perform, saying he just couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. His wife, Billie Jean, who had previously been married to Hank Williams before his tragic death, begged him to come home. Friends say Horton made a series of strange phone calls that night, settling old debts and telling people he cared about them. He even called his mother to tell her where to find important documents, just in case. Then, in the early hours of November 5th, 1960, it happened exactly as he'd dreamed. While driving back from the club in Milano, Texas, Horton's car was struck head-on by a truck driven by a drunk driver. The impact was devastating. Horton's bassist, Tommy Tomlinson, lost a leg in the crash. The manager survived with serious injuries, but Horton, who had been sitting in the front passenger seat, took the full force of the collision. He was still alive when help arrived, but died on his way to the hospital. His last words were reportedly, "I knew this would happen." Eerie parallels didn't stop there. Like Hank Williams before him, Horton died in the prime of his career at age 35. Both men had been married to Billie Jean. Both had their last scheduled performance at the Skyline Club, and both died in vehicles on their way to shows. Billie Jean, now twice widowed by country music tragedies, would later say that Horton had been marked by death in his final weeks. The drunk driver who killed Horton was a teenager named James Davis. He survived the crash but was haunted by it for the rest of his life. Some say Horton's spirit still appears on that stretch of highway near Milano, warning drivers to slow down on foggy nights. Whether his premonitions were coincidence or something more supernatural, Johnny Horton's tragic end remains one of country music's most haunting mysteries. For a man who sang "Take This Job and Shove It," Johnny Paycheck had a hard time walking away from a fight. But on December 19, 1985, at the North High Lounge in Hillsboro, Ohio, his legendary temper would transform from concert hall gossip into courthouse headlines and change his life forever. Paycheck had been drinking heavily that night, nothing unusual for the country star known for his hard-living outlaw image. The bar was packed with locals, including a 35-year-old worker named Larry Wise. According to witnesses, the trouble started over something almost laughably small, an offer of deer meat. Wise had approached Paycheck, suggesting the singer might enjoy some venison. Paycheck's response, "I don't eat DMN deer meat." The situation escalated quickly. What happened next is still debated in country music circles. Some say Wise made a threatening move. Others claim Paycheck was looking for trouble from the start. What's certain is that words were exchanged about Paycheck's mother, and within seconds, the country star pulled out a .22 caliber pistol. In front of dozens of horrified witnesses, he shot Wise in the head. Incredibly, Wise survived, though the bullet grazed his skull and left him with permanent injuries. Paycheck fled the scene but was arrested the next day. His defense team tried to argue self-defense, claiming Wise had threatened him with a knife, though no knife was ever found. The trial became a media circus. Paycheck showed up to court in flashy suits, playing to the cameras and maintaining his innocence. But the jury wasn't buying it. In 1986, they found him guilty of aggravated assault with specifications of causing serious physical harm. The sentence was harsh: 7-9 years at the Chillicothe Correctional Institute. Paycheck appealed repeatedly, even appearing on TV shows to plead his case. His friend Merle Haggard tried to help by starting a free Paycheck campaign. But it wasn't until 1991 that Ohio Governor Richard Celeste granted him parole after serving about 2 years. By then, Paycheck's career was effectively over. Country radio wouldn't touch his music anymore. The man who'd once topped the charts was reduced to playing small clubs and county fairs. In interviews years later, Paycheck admitted the shooting was the biggest mistake of his life. "I was drinking hard, taking pills, living that outlaw life for real," he said. But there's a difference between singing about being an outlaw and actually being one. I learned that difference the hard way. Known as the Young Sheriff and the Singing Sheriff, Faron Young seemed to have it all in country music's golden age. Hit records, movie roles, and millions in real estate investments made him one of Nashville's biggest success stories. But beneath the rhinestone suits and charming smile, Young was fighting demons that would eventually lead him down a path of no return. By the early 1990s, Young's behavior had become increasingly erratic. During performances at the Grand Ole Opry, he'd suddenly stop singing and launch into bizarre rants about the music industry. Fellow performers recall him showing up to shows drunk, sometimes threatening band members with violence if they played a wrong note. The charming sheriff was gone, replaced by someone his oldest friends barely recognized. What many fans didn't know was that Young had been diagnosed with emphysema and was battling severe depression. The man who'd once owned a successful music publishing company was watching his empire crumble. Mercury Records, his label for over 30 years, dropped him. Radio stations stopped playing his music. Younger country stars he'd helped early in their careers, including Willie Nelson, who'd sold him Hello Walls for $500, seemed to have forgotten him. The situation reached a breaking point during a Christmas party at his home in 1995. Witnesses say Young spent the evening showing guests his gun collection and talking about settling scores, with music industry figures he believed had wronged him. His son Robin tried to get him professional help, but Young refused, saying he wasn't crazy, just tired. On December 9, 1996, Young checked into a Holiday Inn in Nashville. He spent his last hours making phone calls to old friends, though many didn't answer. His reputation for angry, drunken calls had made people wary. He wrote a note to his children, blaming his actions on the combination of poor health and what he called the death of real country music. Then he raised a .38 caliber pistol to his head and pulled the trigger. Young didn't die immediately. He lingered for hours in the hospital, giving his friends and family one last cruel twist of fate to endure. When he finally passed the next day, Nashville's response was oddly muted. Many who'd known him for decades admitted they'd seen it coming, but felt powerless to help. A letter found in his hotel room revealed his final thoughts. "I can't unhear the silence. The phones that used to ring off the hook don't ring at all anymore." In late 2003, country music's king of the honky-tonk was living quietly in Fort Pierce, Florida, with Mary Lou, his wife of 43 years. Gary Stewart, famous for his distinctive high-pitched voice and hits like "She's Acting Single, I'm Drinking Doubles," had largely retreated from the spotlight. But what happened next would shock even the most hardened Nashville veterans. On November 26th, just before Thanksgiving, Mary Lou was found dead in their home, killed by a single gunshot wound. Investigators initially treated it as a possible homicide, but the truth was even darker. Gary was devastated. The couple had been childhood sweethearts, married when they were both just 16. Friends say he walked around in a daze, telling everyone who'd listen that he couldn't live without her. A week later, on December 16th, Gary's daughter found him dead in their ranch home. Like his wife, he'd died from a single gunshot wound. The timing was haunting. He'd taken his life on their 43rd wedding anniversary. But what made the story even more chilling were the circumstances surrounding Mary Lou's death. The medical examiner ruled it accidental, saying she'd been cleaning a gun when it discharged. However, some close to the couple questioned this finding. In the days between the deaths, Stewart had been recording new music, which struck many as odd. These final recordings, never released, were said to contain some of the darkest material he'd ever written. Studio engineers reported that his behavior during these sessions was extremely unusual. He'd frequently stop mid-song to make phone calls or stare silently into space for long periods. The mystery deepened when investigators found a series of cryptic notes in Stewart's home. Some appeared to be song lyrics, others were rambling letters addressed to deceased country stars. Most disturbing was a detailed calendar marking both the date of Mary Lou's death and the date of his planned suicide, suggesting he might have known about or been involved in her death. This pointed to Stewart's long battle with alcohol and depression as factors in the tragedy. His career had peaked in the mid-70s, and he'd struggled to adapt to changing musical tastes. But those closest to him insist there was more to the story. Some claim Mary Lou had discovered something in the weeks before her death, something that made her nervous enough to start keeping a diary, which mysteriously vanished after the deaths. The case remains officially closed, but questions linger. Was Mary Lou's death truly accidental? Why did Gary choose to record new music in his final days? And what happened to Mary Lou's missing diary? Some in Nashville believe the full story of Gary Stewart's tragic end will never be known. Webb Pierce wasn't just any country star. He was Nashville's first real superstar, with more #1 hits in the 1950s than anyone else. But in 1969, he started a war that would divide Music City and turn some of country's biggest names against each other. The battleground, his own front yard. Pierce had built a $30,000 swimming pool shaped like a guitar at his Cedarwood mansion on Franklin Road, Nashville's most prestigious address. But that was just the beginning. He added a miniature frontier town, complete with saloons and jail cells. Then came the mechanical horse that visitors could ride for photos. Soon, his mansion looked more like Disneyland than a home, and that was exactly how Pierce wanted it. The real trouble started when he opened his property to tourists. For $2 a head, fans could tour the grounds, peek into his windows, and even snap photos in his famous $40,000 automobile with silver dollars studded into the upholstery. Tour buses started arriving daily, sometimes as many as 30 a day, bringing hundreds of screaming fans to what had been a quiet, exclusive neighborhood. His neighbors weren't just annoyed, they were furious. And these weren't ordinary neighbors. Country legend Minnie Pearl lived next door. Roy Orbison was just down the street. They all filed complaints, but Pierce ignored them. When they tried to get the city council involved, he doubled down by adding loudspeakers that blasted his hits across the neighborhood 24/7. The situation reached a boiling point when Minnie Pearl took legal action. She testified that tourists were trampling her gardens, peering into her windows, and even trying to climb her fence. Other neighbors reported fans stealing their mail and camping on their lawns, but Pierce fought back, claiming his successful neighbors were just jealous of his entrepreneurial spirit. The legal battle dragged on for years, costing Pierce over $300,000, nearly $3 million in today's money. He hired private investigators to dig up dirt on his neighbors and even accused some of running their own unofficial home tours. The controversy split Nashville's music community, with some defending Pierce's right to profit from his fame, while others saw him as destroying the city's genteel reputation. Eventually, the city passed new zoning laws specifically targeting tourist attractions in residential areas. Pierce was forced to shut down his home tours, but the damage to his reputation was done. Many in Nashville's elite circles never spoke to him again. The guitar-shaped pool in Frontier Town remained as silent monuments to what some called Pierce's folly, and others called the day music died on Franklin Road. Of all the wild stories in country music history, none captures the desperation of addiction quite like the tale of George Jones and his riding lawnmower. While the incident has become almost legendary, spawning jokes and even a music video, the real story is far darker than most fans realize. It was the early 1960s, and Jones was already earning his nickname No-Show Jones for missing concerts due to his drinking. His then wife, Shirley Corley, had developed a system for handling his binges. She'd hide all the car keys before going to bed, but she'd underestimated the determination of a man in the grip of addiction. One night, after running out of alcohol and finding his keys gone, Jones lay awake listening to the sound of a nearby liquor store calling his name. That's when he heard it, the gentle purr of his riding lawnmower in the garage. Shirley had forgotten about the 8 vehicle, probably assuming no one would be desperate enough to drive it several miles for booze. She was wrong. Witnesses along the dark highway that night reported a surreal sight. One of country music's biggest stars, barely able to sit upright, putt-putting along the shoulder on a lawnmower. Some say he was singing to himself. Others claim he was having full conversations with people who weren't there. By the time he reached the liquor store, he'd become a local legend. But what many don't know is that this wasn't a one-time event. Jones would repeat this journey numerous times over the years, even after Shirley started hiding the lawnmower keys too. He'd hotwire the machine or find other unconventional vehicles, including, according to some sources, a kiddie car he could barely fit into. Each time, the story would spread through Nashville, adding to his mystique while masking the serious nature of his addiction. In later years, Jones would talk about these incidents with a mix of humor and regret. "I imagine I must have looked quite a sight," he wrote in his autobiography. "But looking back, I can see how close I came to dying out there on that highway." He revealed that on at least one of these lawnmower journeys, he nearly got hit by a semi-truck that didn't see him in the dark. The story became so embedded in country music lore that Jones eventually filmed a music video featuring him on a riding mower. But those who knew him best say he used humor to deflect from the pain of those years. His fourth wife, Nancy, would later reveal that even after getting sober, he'd sometimes wake up from nightmares about those desperate rides through the darkness. In the early hours of August 29, 1998, a gunshot shattered the quiet of a small Texas town, setting off a chain of events that would forever change the life of country music's first major Mexican-American star. Johnny Rodriguez, known for hits like Pass Me By and You Always Come Back to Hurting Me, found himself facing a murder charge that would test the limits of self-defense laws and country music's loyalty. The incident took place in his mother's home in Sabinal, Texas. Rodriguez claimed he heard noises around 4 a.m. and discovered an intruder in the kitchen. The man was Israel Bosco Borrego, a 26-year-old acquaintance of Rodriguez's family. What happened next would be debated in courtrooms and country music circles for years to come. According to Rodriguez, Borrego made an aggressive move, and the singer fired his gun in self-defense. But prosecutors painted a different picture, suggesting Rodriguez had been drinking and may have overreacted to someone who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Adding to the mystery, Borrego's family claimed he often visited the house and might have been invited in by another family member. The trial became a media sensation, with Nashville watching closely. Rodriguez's defense team brought in character witnesses from the country music community, while prosecutors questioned why a supposed intruder was shot in the back. The autopsy revealed Borrego had a blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit, adding another layer of complexity to the case. The most dramatic moment came when Rodriguez took the stand. Breaking down in tears, he described years of break-ins at his mother's home and his fear for her safety. "I didn't want to kill anybody," he testified. "But when someone's in your mama's house at 4 in the morning, you don't stop to ask questions." In a stunning verdict, the jury found Rodriguez not guilty after less than 2 hours of deliberation. But the damage to his career was already done. Radio stations had pulled his music, and concert bookings dried up. The first Hispanic country star to hit #1 on the charts found himself essentially blacklisted from the industry he'd helped diversify. If these shocking scandals from country music's golden age left you stunned, you're not alone. From Spade Cooley's horrific crimes to George Jones's desperate lawnmower rides, these stories reveal the darker side of fame that Nashville tried to keep hidden. But here's something even more shocking. These aren't even the worst scandals from country music's past. Watch this video next to find out.